Welcome, everyone. My name is Michael Stegner, and today I'm going to be talking about finding your own style and developing your own style, your own unique voice. And the reason I am going to do that is because, for whatever reason, this week I've had students, people I've come across out in the world, be very concerned that they don't have their own style. And so this is something that I work on a lot with students, and I just thought it was time. It was a sign to share some thoughts. You can leave comments in the chat. You can leave comments in the comment section if it's after the fact. I will either try to respond during the chat or make a video response or reply in the comments. But either way, I'd love to hear your all's experiences around finding your own style. So the ironic thing is that several of the people who have had this concern in the past, the ironic thing is that they are very unique, typically, and are viewed as such, not just by me, but by peers, audience members, whatever. They're very unique. So the first thing I'll talk about on this topic is that sometimes how we feel about our sound, about our creations, about our art, has nothing to do with reality. I think this day and age where everybody's on social media comparing themselves to everybody else, we can kind of like start to create a reality based on that reality, which isn't even real, oftentimes not real. And we can start to feel like we don't stack up in certain ways. And in this case, these folks, I think, have been influenced a little by that. And they are realizing that because they don't perceive themselves as having something that person X, Y, and Z has that they see on social media, that they don't have their own unique style. Or that some people are really good at describing their personal style, kind of like almost like a marketing pitch. You know how we have to market things and have a pitch, like, oh, I sound like this, or I'm influenced by this, and this is my personal style, combination of da 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 da. And so when people can't verbalize that as clearly, then a lot of times they start to feel insecure about their personal voice, which it doesn't mean, just because you don't have that description handy and you haven't worked that part out, doesn't mean that you don't have a unique style. So I'll talk about those thoughts first, and then get more into like tangible things we can do to help us really hone in whatever styles we're on the verge of, or whatever styles are already like inherently within our reach, due to environment, due to practicing, whatever. So we'll kind of touch on those things. Okay, so when it comes to like how we feel about our personal style or our individual qualities, I think it's a really healthy thing to not contrive a persona, an image that comes from like a shaky foundation. And what I mean by that is, if we decided we want to be, we have a vision of how we want to sound or how we want to appear. If we don't have the chops to pull that off, then we can get frustrated, and we can say like, oh, I don't have my sound, if we have a hiccup along the way or whatever. So a lot of times this whole thing of like not having our own unique kind of personality with our art, whatever we create, it comes from this idea that, sometimes it comes from this idea that we can't match the expectation. Like maybe we have a clear vision of how we want to sound, but we don't have the ability to pull that off. Some people, like I think like pop artists sometimes, they just really can embody this sometimes because, they work so hard at things that they have to be good at, like whether it be a front person being like able to hold the camera in a music video. So they're kind of learning how to act, they're learning how to model, they're learning how to sing, they're learning how to dance. They combine all of those things, and they might have a really clear vision of what they want to do, and they work really hard to get there, and that's their personal style. I think sometimes, like if we're playing piano, for example, we might have a lot of work to do before, like years of work, before we can actually, put our hard work to use in the form of our own personal style. Not that people who go for pop music don't spend years, but sometimes it's just like it can be a little more instant in some cases, or they can get feedback along the way that helps them realize if they're on track or not. Whereas if you got to sit in a room by yourself working out piano stuff for hours and hours over the course of many months or years, it's really easy to lose sight of where you're at. You don't get the feedback until you reach certain benchmarks, and that goes for production. Like I remember when I got really into producing and mixing, I knew what I wanted it to sound like, but I didn't have the ability to do that for several years. And as a piano, I felt like I was somewhat accomplished at piano, and it was really frustrating. It was like learning a new instrument where you just, even though you spent your whole life doing music, you didn't have the ability to make it happen in a way that sounded like final. So part of it is we just have to get better. A lot of times we just have to improve our craft, and we just have to get better. And that's something that I think for the younger generations that are influenced more by social media, because there's other young people that maybe flash at a young age, and we have access to them, and so we see so many people that are very talented at a very young age. I hate even using that word talented. I usually don't use it. But people who flash, we'll just say flash, they have like something very catching, very engaging that sucks in a lot of us, like, wow, look what they can do, this is so cool. And so when we see people who have that and we don't have it yet, we start comparing ourselves unfairly, and it may just be because it's not our time. We haven't kind of reached the point where we can really clearly communicate on that level yet. But it really doesn't matter. Like, we just have to know that we already have our own style. We just might need to improve our craft a little bit. So that thing I just said is we all already have our own unique style is really very important, maybe the most important point of anything I'm going to say now. I believe that it is literally impossible to not have our own style. and I've just seen it so many times with students that play like the same piece of music at a recital, and it's literally impossible, even if they study with the same teacher. Let's say I was teaching them and I have them say that play the same piece and they're on the same level of proficiency. If I encourage them to just play at a high level and leave them some space to fill in the gray areas that all music has, they will sound completely different than each other. It really is impossible for us to not have our own style. Now, at times, our own style might be like, oh, I hear that you've been listening to a lot of so-and-so. And there's plenty, I think plenty of, like, especially jazz artists. I remember, like, when I was really digging in hard to jazz stuff at jazz school, there would be these, say, piano players that you would hear coming up, like up-and-coming young piano players, and you hear a recording and be like, wow, that sounds like Chick Corea, but it's not Chick Corea. And you could tell it was this young artist that was really, at the time, either coming out of a phase or in the middle of a phase where they were really studying and learning to play in ways that Chick Corea did. But now when I hear them, they don't sound like that at all. They've like taken that influence, combined it with other influences. They've had ideas of how they want to approach things that are unique to them and their experiences. And once they find their form and combine all these influences, they're completely unique. So sometimes we're just in process. But even when, say, that piano player was trying to sound like Chick Corea, they didn't. It was like when I heard it, I was like, oh, that sounds like Chick Corea, but it's not. There still was space there where you could hear that it wasn't Chick Corea. It was this other person. And if I had been more familiar with this new up-and-coming artist discography, their like collection of recordings over the past couple years, I would have known exactly who it was. We all walk different. We all talk different. Even like siblings, people who have the same environment, there's just, there are differences between all of us, and it's going to show up when we make music. And so it's not something you have to consciously force the issue on. If you're trying too hard to like be different so that you have your own style, then that is actually not authentic. Like, the most authentic thing I think we can do is just make music without thinking about who we sound like, who we don't sound like, if we're unique or if we're not unique. That's the most authentic version of ourselves. Easier said than done, because we have a lot of influences. I already mentioned social media. We have our teachers. I was fortunate to work with some amazing teachers. And in retrospect, as the years have gone by, from when I was like in high school, I still like will take lessons and stuff today. But during that time, when I just would get kind of like tunnel vision and just think that if I practice and get what my teacher's telling me to do in such a narrow focused way, then I'll get to be where I want it to be. And that was partly on me, and partly on the teachers sometimes, because, they sometimes would allow me, say, to lose track of myself and saying, like, this thing is the ultimate, and if you can get this thing, then you're going to be really good at whatever I'm trying to get you to do. So as a teacher, I'm always very careful about, like, getting something like sounding really good that meets a specific criteria that really doesn't ensure that you sound like you. So there's a big difference. Like sounding like you, I'd rather think of it as we need to make sure that you sound like the best version of yourself. That's like, I think the way that like we can start presenting it now that we have more kind of information, whether it's from dance teachers, sports coaches. That's kind of becoming more and more common, and you see like athletes doing things in a very expressive, really expressive way now. Same thing, musicians. You see musicians like expressing differently on the classical stages, even in what they wear and how they like relate to their instruments. There's a lot more room for personality like today than, especially for women, people of color, like especially in those areas. So I think like, you know, the framing of it that I try to use is let's become the best version of ourselves, because that still means we got to practice a lot to become that version of ourselves. We have to put in the work, but ultimately we are the standard. The standard is within us, I should say. So how do we deal with outside influences? How do we know what our potential is within, while also finding our heroes and the masters and bringing into our own abilities and our own playing and our own creations what they do and what they have done to inspire us and others. So I think I teach this way a lot. What I'm getting ready to say is, and it's very effective. We just have to realize that these things I'm getting ready to talk about do take some time. And depending on what genre you teach or style you teach, you've got some baggage, because I had it too, especially in the classical world. Is probably like the most backwards. That's where I grew up. And like when I was learning classical, it was like everything was on the page. Listening to recordings was not encouraged, because Beethoven wrote it, it's on there, that's all you need, and you don't want to be influenced by other recordings. Like that's very common still. I have classical teachers who don't let their students listen to recordings of whatever pieces they're learning. Then when I switched to jazz, like started switching to jazz and went to jazz school, I had some teachers that wouldn't let me even play what I had prepared unless I could tell them that I had listened to 4 versions of the piece that we were working on and talk about it in a very like thoughtful way, even sing parts of it. Like they really wanted to make sure I was like participating in the listening element of it and like being influenced by other artists. And over time, you get all these influences, and you find people that you really are drawn to, and then you get some people you're not. You start to narrow down who you want to listen to, and then that starts to give you a convergence of influences that eventually you bring into your own playing, and it comes out in a combination, plus your own personality and your own history, and maybe other genres you're listening to, and all this stuff comes together into your sound. So in classical, that was not encouraged. But, I've had several students do really, really well in classical auditions, festivals, competition, whatever, and have careers in music. And we would, if they were learning a Beethoven sonata, we would spend, once they got like an idea of how it sounded, and they could play through it at tempo or close to tempo, usually at tempo for this next exercise, I would have them put on the recording, or not, well, I should back up. I would have them make a list of their favorite concert pianist who had ever recorded the piece. And then they would pick 4 to 5 of those recordings that they enjoyed. And over the next few weeks, couple months, we would just press play in the lesson, and they would play along. They would literally try to match phrasing, dynamics, balance, all the things we work on. They would just try to match the whole performance. And then they did this at home a lot. And we just had a period of like a couple months where they spent kind of wearing those other pianists like right on top of them, just so that they could get that down. And the funny thing is, it didn't cramp their style. It didn't make them sound like clones. It didn't remove any kind of like individuality. What it did was it built all of those things. It made them sound more unique. It made them sound more informed. It made them sound more connected to the essence of the piece. It made them play with more energy. It made them play with more passion. It made them want to practice more. And it made them sound like them. Like only they sound. Because another kid or another student would have picked a different 4 or 5 concert pianists. And so you learn a lot about your students too. You learn a lot about ourselves when we find our influences that we want to copy. So I think one of the best ways to develop our own unique style is to show respect to people who inspire us and learn from them. Like, let the teacher help you learn from those people, like the masters. So there's that. And then in jazz, I mean, one of the best examples of this was when I was a student in college. Branford Marsalis came to our college and talked to us for a couple of days, and he was just around, and we did a big Q&A. And somebody asked him a question about like how he developed his own sound, and he said, you know, when he was like, I think it was probably 13 or 14, he just decided to take 1 year, maybe it was a little later, 15, 16, somewhere in there, when he was a teenager, we'll just say that. He would just pick one of the greatest saxophone players and just copy them for a year. So maybe a year on Coltrane, a year on Wayne Shorter, a year on Sonny Rollins, a year on Charlie Parker, and, you know, do that for like 5 or 7 years, different saxophone players. And by the time you do that, what you have is a very unique sound that calls upon the influence of all the greats that came before you. I mean, granted, some of them probably were still alive and doing amazing things. So it doesn't have to be chronological. You can do this with somebody who's younger than you. So a year is plenty of time. Like, none of us could probably learn a foreign language in a year. And so you're not going to learn to sound just like Coltrane in a year, but you'll get the essence of what somebody like that was all about. And then you move on. And as you move on, my guess is as you move on 5 years, 6 years, 7 years down the road, let's say you're in year 7 and year 2 is Charlie Parker, then my guess is if you go back and kind of revisit some of the Charlie Parker stuff after all that perspective of year 3, year 4, etc., then you're going to be really inspired by Charlie Parker again. So that's really the essence of what I have to say about this, and ways you can practice it. I think that it's really just, it's one of the easiest things that we can do, is to sound like ourselves. as long as we have the space to do it. And unfortunately, there are a lot of like music schools and teachers who are so like rigid with their curriculum that they're not really worried about helping us find like our true voice. And what I mean by that is, let's say you went to a music school that had such a strong theory department and such a strong music history department, and they had really great ensembles, and their primary goal is to make you highly functional, so that if you get a gig 2 years after graduating where you're playing piano or organ for a church, you'll have the chops to do that. Or if you want to play for musical theater in the pit, you'll have the chops to do that. Or if you want to accompany singers who sing around your community, you'll have the chops to do that. That is all very legit. Like, I mean, to help your students become like professional musicians, I'm not disputing that. But sometimes when the program is so like dialed in the step by step, and the expectations from juries and like classes are so specific, then if you're young and you're like someone who really wants to do well by your teachers, you really want to like get good grades, and you really want to like do what your teachers are saying because you respect them so much and like you trust them with all you have, then it's possible we lose track of ourselves during that. And I do feel like it's always temporary. It might only last for the 4 years you're in college. Maybe it lasts for 7 or 8 years, 3 years or 4 years after college. But at some point you will get yourself back. And I think that it's unnecessary to be that so hyper-focused, because you could learn the exact same thing while still being encouraged to be very aware of your own sound. Like, even though you're learning all these things that we're teaching you on how to play church organ or play for musical theater gigs that might come up, I just would like to remind you that your sound is something that is very nice, and I just want you to listen to yourself and just kind of become aware that you have a sound and what your sound is. That's something that we should all be saying to our students, and we should all be saying it to ourselves. So this striving for some unique sound is not necessary as long as we have space. I mean, some of my friends that I play music with, I mean, they're amazing musicians, but they went to maybe more like very loosely run liberal arts colleges where there was barely a music program. Probably nobody or very few people even got scholarships because they just didn't have the budget for that kind of thing. But they maybe had one or two really, really, really high level teachers that would help these students do amazing things. But there was such a looseness in the structure, those students sometimes can be extremely creative and very unique because they weren't so preoccupied with the program or the curriculum. So we all have our unique sound. We all are individual enough in our styles. We go in waves. Sometimes when we're really trying to learn from the masters or learn something that other people have done before us, we might go through a phase where we sound a little bit like somebody, but you'll never be able to sound exactly like them. And even if you thought you were, everybody else would know it wasn't the original person. So it's one of those things where we shouldn't feel pressure to create something that's super unique in style, just like we shouldn't feel pressure to avoid copying temporarily people who are creating things that inspire us. A lot of the most unique artists in history, music and probably otherwise, are people who had influences that they liked. Like, excuse me, going back to jazz fusion or jazz fusion was a fusion of jazz and rock, funk. It fused different styles together. And then when that happened, that was considered very innovative. But that wasn't like a concoction that just came out of thin air. That came out of people who had played jazz for a long time, who were masters in that art form, that were getting inspired by things they were hearing by rock musicians and funk musicians and R&B musicians, and then they brought a little bit of those elements into their jazz playing or into their jazz recordings. So a lot of times our unique style is simply a collection of all the things that we've been inspired by, and I would even argue music related and non-music related. We can't avoid our environment, where we grew up, how we grew up, how much money we had, how much money we didn't have, social situations. Like if you're a teacher and you have students from other parts of the world, it's really important, in my opinion, to make sure that they're asked to learn to play music from wherever they're from, because it's already part of who they are. And if they're able to bring it into what you're asking them to do, what you're familiar with in your curriculum, then that student will be one of your more unique and special sounding students, because nobody has that same influence. Nobody has the collection of influences that will add up to that student, or any of us for that matter, any of our students, any of us who play music. So to summarize, I'm going to wrap it up here. Learn as much as you can about everything that gets you excited. Listen to your teachers when they say, hey, we really should build our concept. We should really build this up. This is a little weak spot you have. Let's get this dialed in so that you can use it to create something special. We all have to do that. So let's just not worry so much about, I don't have my own sound yet. Just stay connected to learning things that get you excited and that inspire you. And then stack all of those things together, line them all up over the years. Just don't put pressure on yourself. Over the months, over the weeks, sure. But this is something that should never end. And then keep adding it to your approach and your own sound. And you've got a unique sound. You will have it. It will be there for you without you even having to try. So that's it. No need to contrive, no need to be superficial and come up with a sound that you want to go for and do it. Like literally just get excited, get inspired, assimilate your favorite things about whatever you're inspired by, learn to do it, stack those things up, and over time, it will be a totally unique situation when anyone listens to you and when you play anything. So hopefully that helps. Leave your comments in the comments section, and if If I can't reply in the comment section, I will make a new video and reply to that. If you like and subscribe, then you will get notifications whenever I do these lives or post new videos. If you're checking this out and somehow skip to the end, I accidentally had the mic off at the beginning. I will edit that out, but if you're watching it here at the beginning of the week, you might get some silence at the beginning, but it will fix itself, obviously, because you can hear me now. All right. Thank you all for joining. And my name is Michael Stegner. Like and subscribe if you found this helpful and all of that stuff. And we'll see you at the next one.